Good morning. Today we look at Psalm 77 and Psalm 78. When I first turned my camera on this morning and set it up, I couldn't even get my head in the screen. I thought, what's going on here? Sure glad that it kind of reverted back. Again, one of those, how do you know what computers and all this modern technology is going to do? In Psalm 77, attributed to Asaph, he's crying out to God for help. That's what he said. It starts, I cry aloud to God that he may hear me. My trouble is, and he doesn't specifically state what his problem is, if it's, mental anguish or if it's physical healing he needs or what it is, but he cries out to God that God would hear him. And he says, in the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul, it refuses to be comforted. Something is weighing heavily on his mind. And, in verse 4, going on, keep my eyelids from sleep. I can't sleep. I can't think. I can't, do any of this. I remember, the mental anguish that he's talking about is tremendous here. He's just, beside himself, we would say sometimes today. And he's just crying out. He's I commune with my heart in the night. I meditate, I search my spirit. Will the Lord spurn forever? Will he never again be faithful? It's that, where is God? And why isn't God doing something again? And we read that, we feel that so often as we read through the Psalms and, through a lot of the Bible. The people feel that God has abandoned them. And, excuse me, the reality is that, God hasn't abandoned us. Asaph asks in verse 9, has God forgotten to be gracious? Has God forgotten who God is? Has he in his anger shut up his compassion? And, it's just, just that tremendous call of, I need help. I need help. I don't know who else to turn to, and I'm not getting any results, or not seeing any results here. And then, starting in verse 11, he remembers so many things of what God has done. He says, I will call to mind the deeds of the Lord. I will remember your works of old. I will meditate on your work and on your mighty deeds. And he goes on with, with your strong arm you led the people. We saw when the waters saw you, they were afraid, God is the God of heaven and earth, and all things of creation. When God speaks, they have to respond. The waters were afraid, the very reach were troubled, the clouds poured out waters. The crash of thunder was in the whirlwinds, and it's remembering who God is. And the end of this psalm, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Remembering the leading of the people of Israel from Egypt through the wilderness. And Psalm 78 talks a lot about that too. I mean, he's remembering back there. It begins with, give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ear to the words of my mouth. So, teach your children, teach your people. If Asaph is, one of the priests, one of the leaders, he's teaching. He's saying, I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings. We will not hide them from our children. We will teach them to the coming generations. Tell them about God and about all of the mighty acts of God. All of the wonders that the Lord has done. He said he established a decree in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel. And he commanded our ancestors to teach their children. And this is, with the Passover meal, as the night before they got told to get out of here from Egypt, the night before the angel of death came, the Passover meal was initiated. And it was a decree from God, an order from God to observe this on a yearly basis and teach your children why it is that we do this. Because God has been faithful. God has led us out of captivity. God has provided for us. God has protected us. and kept us in his care. And so this is, he commanded our ancestors, teach their children so that the next generation might know, the children yet unborn will know about God. And they will rise up, they will teach their children so that they will set their hope and they will trust in God. They will not forget the works of God. And that's, I think, one of the things that, like on Holy Communion, this is the body of, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Remembering. And the same with the cup of wine for the new blood. Do this in remembrance of me. And that's, we decorate our houses for Christmas. We tell the Christmas story because we remember what God has done, and we teach our children. And so we're doing what God has commanded from the very beginning of time, to teach our children so that future generations will know. And in verse 8, so that they will not be like their ancestors, stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God. So it's teach our children so that they know that they can come to God, know that God is faithful to hearing them, know that God is leading them, but to teach our children about God so that they know who God is, so that they trust in this God and they hear God's word and follow God's word. And it's a challenge given each and every day. Last night I was looking at some confirmation material, probably, and what is it and how is it best to teach our children more about what their faith is? And that's in teaching confirmation, and teaching children about God. Number one thing I want them to know is that, that God is a loving and gracious God, that, they can't do anything that will be bad enough that God will reject them. And second thing but another thing of confirmation is to know what it means to be a Christian, to know what it means to be a Lutheran Christian, and not to say there's anything wrong with being some of the other denominations either. But we teach our children so that as they grow up, they will know and trust in this God. And then starting in verse 9, it's the Ephraimites, armed with the bow, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant. They rejected God. They forgot about God. And they forgot what he had done, the miracles that he had shown them. And then in verse 12, it's remembering again some of the mighty acts of God. The sight of the ancestors, he worked marvels in the land of Egypt and the fields of Zion. He divided the sea. He made the waters stand up. In the daytime, he led it by a cloud and by a fire at night. Split rocks open in the wilderness for water to come. Rained down manna. And people ate the food of angels, it says in this psalm, But before you get to that, eating the food of angels, verse 17, yet they sinned against him. I mean, God led them out of Egypt, and then they complained because, they didn't have food. They didn't have we had it so much better in Egypt. They were forgetting the toil, the trouble, the hard work that they had to do. But, then again, I mean, they didn't know how to live as a free people. And, they rebelled against God in the desert. They were, it was, you perverse and faithless generation. It says, the prophets speak that way. But Psalm 78 goes on and, talks about, the deeds of God, how verse 23, he commanded the skies, he opened the doors of heaven, rained down manna so that they ate the bread of heaven, the food of the angels, and rained flesh, so, the meat came so much they could hardly eat it. And then we get to verse 38, in spite of all this they sinned, is in 32, but yet he, being compassionate, a God of grace, did not destroy them. He remembered that they were but flesh, and so are we. We are, not able to do everything that God would have us do. And then we go on and remembering all of the plagues against Egypt and how God leads them into the promised land. And verse 65, the Lord awoke us from sleep like a warrior shouting. Or God, and so it's remembering who God is, teaching about who God is, and how God continued to choose his people. In the very last verse, with an upright heart, he tended them and guided them with a skillful hand. And God still treats us with tenderness and reaches out to guide us and lead us with a tender hand.